Woo, the Golden Stallion, the man of tomorrow, Savzu, the rated R radio star, here, bringing it back. This has actually been requested by many, many listeners that they missed it. And what we're doing is we are bringing back the Q&A. Will we get to the point where we can do live Q&As again? Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I'd love to have guests on, even like co-host style guests on to do that. But I've had a lot of people ask for the Q&As to come back. Of course, the Q&As were were kind of like the reason to be a patron on Patreon. Now people are still patrons and new ones coming often. On Patreon to just support the show, even though there's no bonus content anymore. I'm really honored by that. But the Q&A was kind of like the main feature. But here's the thing. I think, well, first off, again, I've had so many people ask about it. In some ways, I feel like it was almost the most popular thing that I did, whether it was within, in the center, which usually where they placed in the center of an episode of Sovereign Tech publicly, or, when they rested again behind, a paywall on Patreon and so on. And you can still get access to all those Q&As if you do sign up for Patreon. There is a custom RSS feed available to you that will give you all of those. Most of them over the past few years, are not available publicly. And I don't really have an intention, except for maybe special ones here and there I might pluck out and pull out, maybe relevant to some of what we're going to talk about today. Where, they might be interesting to release publicly, but I would probably also edit them to remove names and, private information that some people may, might have been entrusting behind a paywall a little bit. I'm always conscious that I usually keep people anonymous unless they specifically want me to mention their name. Then, of course, I'm happy to. But yeah, so we will start doing these again. And so you can get your questions in. Here's the great thing is that getting questions into me, there is a bunch of ways to do it. Of course, the email address, Telegram, Patreon's own messengers and all that. There's plenty of ways to get those into me. But I think one of the great ways that we could do for this is you can actually comment on Spotify or YouTube and just get your questions and comments in right there. And then I can, respond right off of those. So, feel free to get these in. And I have questions, one that recently came in that I think, well, we got a tech question to get into. And actually, it's kind of two tech questions in one shot. It was an email. Of course, the email is fu@xxtech.net. Woo! How about that? I don't know if I ever gave that email out publicly. I know it's in the show notes, and I just love it that some people were really intrepid enough to oh yeah, let's see what's the latest email to reach him at. And, great. Even though any email I've basically ever had, you can still reach me at, but anyway, it's just nice to have a filter of, okay, who's paying attention, right? Who's on. So, so we have a couple tech questions to get into, and then we're going to get into what I think is actually what I was strangely most popular for, which is getting into the historical stuff. And we're going to go pretty wild on this one. I might, depending upon how it goes, I might feel like laying out some, shall we say, some deeper theories that will probably get, depending upon how many people, listen to this or view it, we'll probably get, I can imagine some nasty replies, because actually the question I'm going to be reading from came off kind of hostile, though maybe they were just, being joculant. I don't know. But we'll get into that. So to open this one up, this one isn't hostile at all. It's very kind. Lord Sovereign. Wow. Opening it up with that. All right. Lord Sovereign, I recently switched to Android, OnePlus Open specifically after 10 years on iOS crack. All right. iOS crack. But I need a replacement for my Apple Watch Ultra. I think I heard you say in a recent real-time SOVRYN that all right, hold on. Let's stop for a second. First off, a OnePlus Open, of course, that's their foldable, right? Very nice. Very, very nice phone. Bravo on picking up one of those. And not cheap. But OnePlus is one of those brands, I'll just say it quick because, I really feel like there are very specific Android brands that you want to stick to. I usually mention, Pixel / obviously that's Google, Pixel, Samsung, of course. And then, Motorola still does incredible work. And of course, there's a lot, this is the hard part with Android, right? I mean, OnePlus is in that number, right? Like easily in the top 4, we'll say, or top 5, if we want to give a top 5. Like easily there. Okay. It's tough with Android because like Asus, which is a company that I for almost 20 years, that I have like relied on their kit almost solely. I mean, I had a bout with MSI with a very, very lovely MSI computer. Of course, Dells are, I'm always a big fan of what they do enterprise-wise. I had one of their gaming laptops. I wasn't really a fan, and I've always sort of felt like, that's not a pun, by the way, gamers, fans. Anyway, I really wasn't super impressed with Dell's gaming laptops, and I think, honestly, like Alienware has been really kind of third tier ever since Dell bought them out. And that was a long, long time ago. But there was a time where Alienware was, they're in like Razer's place where they were creme de la creme, right? But Asus makes smartphones and very good ones. I mean, I even used to have their ones that were the Intel based, Android phones. I know. But no, I mean, like their ROG phones are awesome. I mean, they're really, really awesome. The only thing is, can you count on software support, right? And that's, for me, that's always top, because if the hardware doesn't have the software support, in my opinion, it doesn't matter how good the hardware is. Okay. And look, we don't, just to be quick on this, these like multi-year, as in like 5, 6, 7, 8-year guarantees, okay, that Google and like Samsung make, for that you're going to get Android updates for that long. We've yet to, this isn't exactly true, right? Because like the Pixel 6, actually, Google has lived up to its word. In fact, went beyond its word, because the Pixel 6 was supposed to stop getting new versions of Android as of Android 15. But they're actually going to get the next 2 versions at least, and they might even keep going on beyond that. Okay, this is the advantage, of course, of Google controlling its hardware. But by and large, like we haven't seen going into the future, into really what will be the 2030s, we don't know if these companies are going to hold true, to their promises, their software promises. So that could be all bullshit. But at the same time, like I at least want the effort, and so to me, again, if the software isn't going to support the hardware, like I said, I don't care how good the hardware is. It's part of the reason I don't buy Asus phones now, is because they don't put out any kind of guarantee around that. I really, and granted, I am not everybody else, right? Like security is so top of the bar for me. Like, I mean, you just, that's her on the ladder. Like that's the first rung. Like you've got to get that right. Otherwise, and you've got to support that for a long time. Otherwise, nothing else really matters. So that's the hard part with Android, is that, there are really great Android phones made by not really boutique companies, but basically by other manufacturers that I mentioned. Again, they're great phones, but how long are they great phones for? Right? If they don't have the security updates and the software to back them up. So that's the hard part with Android, is there's actually Asus is a fantastic manufacturer. I'm recording this on an Asus A16 Plus. This is the best laptop I've ever used. I mean, just fucking flat out. like this thing's amazing. I wish I had more than 32 gig of RAM. Unfortunately, RAM gets soldered onto most laptop boards now. Not all, but most, unfortunately. That's a whole other concern. But bar none, this is just like the fucking best laptop I've ever used, and in many ways that I've ever seen. And it doesn't have to do with the Copilot Plus features either, which aren't there yet anyway, and that's a whole separate conversation. But I don't want to get lost on all that. Okay, I'm just saying that your choice, the ultimate point I'm getting to here, is that your choice of OnePlus was a top tier choice. Fantastic. So, and I know foldables, that's certainly a very interesting area. And something that, well, as you called it, the iOS crack doesn't deliver on, at least not yet. And even when they do, I don't know. Anyway, okay, so let's get back into this. A lot of what I just said, by the way, I got to the point, I think, where you said you're looking for a replacement for your Apple Watch. A lot of what I just said about manufacturers is all true for smartwatches as well, but I'll get into your question more here. So let's reread it. Let's reread it. Okay, Lord Sovereign, I recently switched to Android, a OnePlus Open specifically, after 10 years on iOS crack, but I need a replacement for my Apple Watch Ultra. I think I heard you say in a recent Real-Time Sovereign that you thought smartwatches, at least on Android, weren't quote-unquote there yet. But I wonder if you do have a recommendation for a solid Android smartwatch alternative. Should I be looking at Garmin or still a Pixel watch? Now there's a little bit more to this, and I'll get to that. But let's get into the watch conversation. Actually, no, you know what? Let me read to this part in the email here. Let's see. I left Apple behind after realizing just how far behind they are in AI. Do you think Gemini is going to take them? Not exactly sure. I guess by take them, you mean like, is it going to overtake them? Okay, we'll get into all that, but that's a second question really. So let's talk about the smartwatch. Okay, so something to be comparable to your Apple Watch Ultra. So I've used an Apple Watch Ultra. Okay, this question, there are things I'm going to say to you that you have to dig really deep, maybe into like Reddit or Hacker News or something, to try to find out about what I'm about to tell you. I only know of it through personal experience. This is part of the reason that I will sometimes ecosystem hop, just so that I know all of these weird quirks that nobody fucking talks about. Ever. Like, or that you don't even really know to search for, even if it's out there. I mean, come on, it's the internet. There's more people, ecosystem hopping than me. There are other tech journalists, tech enthusiasts, and whatever out there than me. So of course, other people run into this stuff and they find out about this stuff. But like, if you don't even know about it, you don't even know to search for it. You don't even know that it's a problem until one day it like just smacks you in the face, right? So like, I think of the complexities around, it's so funny. So like, we thought, okay, now one of the reasons that, and you didn't say this in your email, but one of the reasons that you may have felt a little more comfortable going to Android away from, say, Apple is, Apple now is all in on USB-C, right? And of course, Android's been all in on USB-C for ever, pretty much ever since that became a standard. The problem is that people soon learn is that USB-C is very far from being a quote unquote standard, right? There are so many different types of USB-C. USB-C really is just a fitting, and that's it. Again, it's a very small elliptical fitting, and that's it. Everything else is up for grabs. The speeds, what a USB-C cable can do, all that stuff, what a port can do, all that stuff is way up in the air, right? You have USB 3.0, 3.1, 3.2, USB 4, which is awesome, by the way. I power my whole studio through one USB 4 port. It's fucking amazing. I mean, it's pretty much the same thing as Thunderbolt 4, but which now there's Thunderbolt 5. But this is my point. Okay, is that USB-C means a whole hell of a lot of things. Okay, So like one of the little quirks, so I was trying to like set up at one point, I was trying to set up my Meta Quest 3 to connect, to link to my PC so that I could play, PC VR games, right? So, so I could play Steam VR stuff. No Man's Sky, Skyrim VR, heavily modded, of course. You know the story. Things like this, okay? And I was trying to connect it, and I mean, it's stupid. The link cable from Meta themselves is just an outrageous, it's like $80. Okay. Now, that's not to say, I mean, speaking of people charging insane prices for cables, we all know about that one Apple cable, right? That's like $160 or something insane. Look, I mean, I'm sure that the engineering is in there to some degree. Okay. But there's no need, there's no reason to connect, a headset like that to a USB-C port on a desktop computer or laptop, whatever. It doesn't need anything that special, right? So you can find, so again, the official Meta Link cable is like $80, $90, $100, whatever price you can find it for. A $20 cable is going to do that job. Okay. $20 of materials is going to do the same job, and you can find them. Okay. And they're out there. And obviously I went for the cheaper alternative. Why? Because it's what I got to do. And I tried it out, and like the reviews, are like, oh no, yeah, this works. I couldn't get it to work. I couldn't get anything to play right for it to connect correctly. Now, granted, there are software issues within this for sure between Windows and the Meta Quest, but whatever, like I just couldn't get it to work, even though I know it was working for some people. Okay. And you know what the damnedest thing was? So the Meta Quest has a USB-C port on its left side, and that's what you have to plug that into. Okay. And believe me, I tried plugging into all the different ports, and I have many on this laptop, or even into the USB 4 port to make sure there's enough power going to it and all this shit. And, nothing was working. Okay. So there's a USB-C port again on the left side of the Meta Quest visor or headset, whatever. And that, okay. Now there's a way that you think that you should wear, or like that a USB-C cable should be going from that, the way that it's designed, where the green light, so that that it's connected and you're getting power, which this cable also had, just like the official MetaLink cable, is pointing away from, basically it's pointing in front of you. Okay. And you can watch videos on all this, and that's how it's always done in every one of these videos. But this cable that I got, yes, it's a knockoff, but again, there's no reason that it shouldn't work. Technically, it's the same fucking thing. Okay. But then, I'm starting to, eventually I get to the point where like, okay, when I have some time, and whenever the hell that is, when I have some time, I finally sit down with some coffee, and it's like, all right, let's see if we can find out what the deal is with this. And after a good while of searching, okay, and look, Perplexity didn't help. I tried. And not the free version. Okay. I look into it and not finding anything. Then finally, in the deep recesses of Reddit, where only the freaks, the villains, the despicable people, despicable, the despicable ones exist, places where I hang out. It's where I find all the Sovereign Tech listeners, right? Just look for the nearest criminal dive. And anyway, no, government's the real criminals. All right, moving on. And finally, somebody says, hey, I had this off-market cable, and I just put the USB-C cable in the other way, so that basically the green light was facing the wrong direction, as in towards the back of your head. And suddenly it worked. And I tried it, and God damn it, it worked. Now, the reason again, we're going to get to this question, okay? But the reason I bring this up is, wait a minute, what was the whole point of USB-C as a quote unquote standard, right? The whole point of it was that you didn't have to get in, it was to replace USB-A, which you could always put in wrong, right? And you'd have to flip it around. You didn't know what direction it needed to go in, blah, 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 because, it didn't have this like universal fit. That was the entire fucking purpose of USB-C, was to stop that problem from happening. Yeah, increase speeds, but we all know USB-A can do any of this just as, can do USB 3.1, 3.2, USB 4. Okay, maybe that's not the case, but that's so new. We all like USB-A can do all of that. It can handle all of those speeds. The purpose of USB-C was so that you didn't have to fiddle around with which way does this go in, right? Like you could act with some confidence, unlike a lot of men out there who, are just like, wait, how do I do this? Which way does this go in? Is this the right hole? No, sorry. Excuse me. But no, that's not how this works, right? I mean, and that's to say nothing of, again, all the different types of, USB cables and throughputs that exist out there, which, again, most people, and I know even in very professional and technical settings, engineering settings and all that, believe me, I know the deal. I know firsthand accounts where people are like, no, of course it's USB-C. It's just going to work. No, it doesn't. And this link cable for the MetaQuest 3 was the same deal. As soon as I flipped it around, boom, put it in the other way, it worked. Even though it's USB-C, supposed to be universal fit. Nope. So USB-C isn't really a standard, right? So my point in saying all of this, of that whole long story, is that there are things that, other like reviewers on YouTube, all these people who, whatever, they get 400,000, 500,000 followers, millions of views, blah, blah, blah. And they're telling you about, I don't know, you get some blonde gal who's just like, oh, and this is the amazing thing from Microsoft. And this is, and they never tell you all of these little quirky fucking things. Ever. And so I'm honored that you asked me about this, because my experience with the Pixel Watch 3, which is what I use, and that and you mentioned that I talked about recently, has brought some very interesting things to light that I haven't talked about, and that you're very hard pressed. In fact, I've never, ever seen, and I mean, look, you got to understand, there's a very specific set of websites that I go to pretty much every day. Okay. Like I go to Nintendo Life, PC Gamer, and then I go to like Android Authority, 9 to 5 Google, Android Police, and so on, and I mean, there might be some others, but those are some that like every day I'm checking what's up. And there's some quirks, and I don't mean bugs. I mean like by design quirks that I've never seen them talk about, even with the Pixel Watch 3. And they'll do multiple fucking reviews of these things, and they never talk about it. And I'm going to get into one of those because it's a big one that isn't just true for the Pixel Watch. I think it's true for pretty much, any manufacturer, any ecosystem you go for. And it's something that I had an Apple Watch Ultra 2, and that I think did not have this problem, but that thing had a whole slew of other problems. But I'll get into that comparison, with you here. So, okay. After I've said that whole story one more time, going to read the question, and then we'll dive in on it. Lord Sovereign, I recently switched to Android after 10 years on iOS crack, but I still love that. But I need a replacement for my Apple Watch Ultra. I think I heard you say in a recent Real-Time Sovereign that you thought smartwatches, at least on Android, weren't quote unquote there yet. But I wonder if you do have a recommendation for a solid Android smartwatch alternative. Should I be looking at Garmin or still a Pixel Watch? And then we'll get to your second question quick. Okay. Yeah. So, OnePlus, has a full ecosystem, right? Like they have earbuds, or, headphones, whatever. Like they have the whole thing. Like they've become a full on ecosystem of their own. And they have, I think they're up to the OnePlus Watch 3 at this point. My understanding is the OnePlus Watch 3 can get like 4 days of battery life, which is fantastic for a smartwatch. We're not talking about the newly released Pebbles, or in some degree re-released, right? And they can't be called Pebbles anymore. We're not getting into that territory. Might talk about those things a little bit. I do think for Android, if you wanted to get like the new Pebble releases that were just announced a few days ago, and we're in March 2025 right now, I think those are phenomenal choices. Okay. It depends on what you want to do, but you're coming from the reason I'm not going to necessarily recommend those, even though I heartily do. And great move, by the way, on Google's part, devil is due. Great part on Google's part great move on Google's part to open source the Pebble OS, after they bought it out, or after Fitbit bought it out, but then Google bought Fitbit, right? Okay. Fitbit is important to bring up here. So, I do recommend those, but anyway, again, you're coming from Apple Watch Ultra, so let's break that down. Okay. Look more in that range. All right. So it's a OnePlus Open. Now, the OnePlus Watch, again, it gets 4 days of battery life. Now, there's a reason, actually, that it gets 4 days of battery life compared to, say, any of Samsung's Galaxy series of watches or even the Pixel Watch, including the 45mm 3, which I have. That is, they do not have LTE built into them. Okay. Now, that may not be a deal breaker for you, but you're coming from an Apple Watch or an Apple Watch Ultra. Okay. So I'm guessing, I think even the Ultra 1, the Ultra 2, no matter which one you bought, came with the LTE. And I think the Ultra 1 was the same deal. Okay. So this, if you're wanting that pound for, or that pound for pound comparison, in the Android space, you are actually limited in what you can get your hands on. As far as I know, granted, I can't know everything. And there are, again, with Android, the other weird thing is, you have like Xiaomi, you have other companies that around the world, that make whole other things that you can't buy in the US. And actually, I'm not even sure where you're from. So, maybe you can get your hands on Xiaomi stuff and, then everybody sweats, oh, you're handing stuff over to the Chinese government, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, you're handing stuff over to the government no matter what you're using. But anyway, just always keep that in mind. So, all right. You're really limited and basically you're limited to like Samsung or Google's Pixel, brand. If you want the LTE, if you don't want the LTE, then the answer, in my opinion, is very simple. Stick within your ecosystem and go with the OnePlus Watch 2 or 3, whatever fits your price point. But if you need that LTE, so here's the problem with, in my opinion, it's not a problem if you're in the ecosystem. It's a problem if you're not. Because the Samsung Galaxy watches actually have way more features and really a whole other app store, as I understand it, a whole other app store that Pixel watches do not. Okay. So, but the thing is, there are features specific to the Galaxy Watch, including the Galaxy Watch Ultra, they're high end, that really only work with other Samsung hardware. So, you basically, what I'm saying is the Galaxy series is kind of pointless because they don't play well with other ecosystems. Okay. So, as great a hardware as it is, software is a different story, but as great a hardware as it is, if it doesn't play, if you don't get to take advantage of all the features, is it worth the price point? No, I don't think so. Even though, let's be clear here, for my Pixel Watch 3, I've tested all of its features, but I don't use a lot of its features. Also, I got this thing basically for free. So, at that price point, who cares what you do with it, right? Other than throw it away. You don't want to do that. Let's eliminate the e-waste, shall we? Anyway, so yeah, as long as you don't mind not having LTE, I say go with the OnePlus Watch And getting that 4-day of battery life is, that's awesome. Okay. But if you need the LTE, I think really your only option, and that also eliminates Garmin. Garmin's are great. They have really legendary, battery life as far as that goes, because they're fucking huge and you want to keep that in mind. I don't have any problem with Garmin's smartwatches. I think they're really, really solid stuff. Again, it's a question, do you need that LTE? And if you do need the LTE, so you mentioned Garmin, and again, if you don't mind not having LTE, yeah, Garmin's great too, and will play well with any ecosystem. Like they're really agnostic as far as that goes, which is awesome. Okay. So keep that in mind. But otherwise, yeah, the other one you mentioned, the Pixel Watch, I think you kind of already know, like that's your only option in my opinion for LTE, today. So the thing is, like I mentioned Fitbit, it is a weird dichotomy when you go from, say, Garmin or OnePlus, or really any Android smartwatch, to, say, a Pixel smartwatch, because the main feature set of the Pixel smartwatch minus LTE, the main feature set is all Fitbit shit. And that's all first party Google now. And there's a lot of cool things in that. I mean, like even, all the health data that it collects, the Fitbit app now, has an AI back end to it where it can give you analysis on your sleep patterns and all kinds of other stuff. And I've tested this, or I'm a beta tester on it. You have to request to get in on that. And I got in on it, I don't know, a couple months ago. And sometimes it's interesting. It lays out a lot of disclaimers because it has to, but it can be somewhat interesting. It's not a deal breaker though. The fitness features overall still, in my opinion, on a smartwatch, are not that killer of a feature. Okay. I still really feel like a smartwatch's best features is just doing as much as you can without, on a watch without needing your phone. Like that's what makes a great smartwatch. Okay. And that's why I think honestly, you'd be just fine with a OnePlus Watch 3. Even a Garmin might be a bit overkill, but anyway, so I mentioned that quirk. Well, here's the quirk. Because with an Apple Watch Ultra, one of the other things that I'm sure you do often, would be, or maybe not, but would be to actually message people from your watch. Now, as I recall from my time with the Ultra Watch or Watch Ultra 2, you could only use iMessage and I think WhatsApp. There might have been like some third-party apps that, for Satan's sake, I would not install to use Telegram or any. I mean, I already Telegram is such a clusterfuck right now, and like the spam it's so funny because you got Pavel Durov getting arrested in France back in August, and it's like, oh yeah, we're cracking down, we're cracking down, and I have more bots and more bullshitters messaging me now. Like I can't leave it open. I can't. I'll go nuts. And partly it's because I have a very quote unquote attractive. No, I'm not attractive. I'm saying I have a very attractive username @SOVRYN that is like attractive to the crypto space. And so I just get inundated, and I feel bad because I miss lots of people's Telegram messages all the time. And I'll see them like much, much later. It's like, oh, fuck, because again, I just can't leave it open. It's too much. So anyway, yeah, so, iMessage and WhatsApp were basically your options on Apple Watch. Okay. Now, you could send those through LTE, no problem, right? Which is really, really handy. I love that. Okay. Now, with a Pixel Watch, you actually kind of run into the same situation where the only ones you can use are Google Messages, right? Which is a very full-featured app these days. And WhatsApp. Those are really your only two options. Now you can reply to notifications. Okay. But this is where things get quirky and where they get very complex, because those notifications don't go to the watch. They go to your phone, which then sends them to your watch, not through Bluetooth. It can send them through any radio. It can even send it via LTE. Okay. But this is the weird thing when you, and it is a spot where I think Android is slightly inferior to what Apple is doing with Apple Watch. I have my own problems with Apple Watch. Okay. But, and really it comes down to like the LTE, the connectivity was so wildly inconsistent to the point that it almost became unusable. Like it would take forever for it to switch from Wi-Fi to LTE. The Pixel Watch, that is no problem. It will switch to whatever radio it needs, even Bluetooth, in a heartbeat. It's so fast and so consistent. The connectivity is top fucking drawer. And when a device is, mission critical, which for me, all my devices are, I treat them all that way anyway. You need that consistent uptime. And in my opinion, people can disagree with me, but my usage of the Ultra Watch 2 in all kinds of different geographies was not great as far as like really, again, switching to, it was the LTE that just kept fucking up. And I actually did use it also on multiple mobile providers. So anyway, that's why I can only assume the problem's actually Apple Watch. And I don't know why more people don't complain about this. And the only thing I can imagine is that, I don't know, either they're like constantly bathed in connectivity in the middle of cities or something, and so they never notice, or they always have their phones by them, and so it's never a problem. I don't know. But like, again, for me, the watch is to replace the phone, or is to make the phone less necessary, that you don't have to take the phone with you. That's the beauty of the watch, right? And that's why, if I get a smartwatch, like I want it to have LTE. So say I can use Google Wallet or Apple Wallet, wherever I am, whenever I need it. Okay. And I do that a lot, like way more than I ever expected that I would, without having to pull out, my giant honking ass phone. It's a Pixel 9 Pro XL. And really like that just doesn't even in my man pockets, it just doesn't fit. So anyway, okay. So the quirk. When, the Apple Watch Ultra 2 would connect, using WhatsApp, using iMessage, worked fantastic without the phone around. Worked really, really well. And even with the phone off, there's the trick, the phone off. When we get to the Pixel Watch 3, and, again, this really only applies to if you're away from your smartphone, you're using LTE, whatever. If your phone is off, okay, you will not receive text messages. You will not receive anything through Google Messages. Nothing. Okay. Now, this is a feature, not a bug. Okay. I don't like it. It defeats the purpose, in my opinion, or it defeats a large purpose of the watch, but I understand why it's set up this way. Okay. But good luck finding anybody that talks about this, other than somewhere, again, in the deep, seedy parts of Reddit where, my listeners hang out. That's the only place you're going to find out about this. I think it was a while before Google even kind of admitted to it, and even in their documentation, it's just fucking buried. So the situation is, now, if you're familiar in the Android space, like when you connect, you go to like messages.android.com. Okay, so that you can receive text messages in your web browser, right? It's kind of your way of mimicking iMessage on a Mac. Okay. When you do that, and again, you can also, if you have Google Fi, you can actually do it to where Google Fi answers everything on the server. And so that this isn't, that this would be a very different issue at that point. But that's if you're using Google Fi, and I don't know who your telco is. So we'll just keep rolling with this, that this is generally a problem. But I also don't like to turn that feature on with Google Fi. So, because then you can't, the reason being is if you turn on Google Fi beta, the backup for messages and calls, you can still get encrypted phone calls, or no, you can't even get those. Basically it kills all of the RCS and like enhanced chat features and everything out of messages. And so fuck it, right? Because then you're not, also, if you're interested in like communicating with iMessage in a more efficacious, feature rich way from Android, it's not going to happen. So that's that's never gone out of beta. That feature has never gone out of beta for Google Fi, and it probably never should. So anyway, so if you turn off when you're, or sorry, to get back to this, when you're connecting to Android messages on your laptop, on your desktop, you do a QR code scan, right? And then, basically, and you'll get a notification on your Android phone that, okay, this is like another device is accessing your messages or is able to receive your messages anyway. But what's effectively happening is, like, if you turned off your smartphone and you still had your desktop open and you had, you were at the website for Android messages, or you had a PWA or something on your desktop, you're not going to receive any messages or calls, right? As to where if your phone was on, because everything's really just being routed through your phone, then they would work and you could take calls and respond to text messages right on your laptop or your desktop. This feature, other than the phone calls, works the same with text messages, works the same exact way on Android smartwatches. Your phone has to be on to receive text messages on your Android smartwatch. This is a security feature, okay? Because that way your text messages aren't going in the clear on servers and wherever else. So, again, it's a feature, not a bug, but it sucks. Okay? Like, it really, really sucks. Because, again, for me, I want to turn the fucking phone off. I don't want to carry the phone with me. All right? Now, this is the same way, like I said, and this is what started this conversation. I can receive like signal notifications on my Pixel Watch, and I can even respond to them from my Pixel Watch, but I will only receive those notifications if my smartphone is on, because Signal is not installed on the watch. And this is true for most messaging apps. They're not actually installed on the watch. The one outlier is the same as it is on Apple Watch Ultra, okay, or on the Apple Watch, and that's WhatsApp. So WhatsApp, in its unfortunate way, is actually superior to Google Messages in that it does function completely independently on your smartwatch. So, if your phone's off, you can still receive WhatsApp calls and messages and whatever else you do on WhatsApp. I understand, like, this makes WhatsApp incredibly attractive, right? For a lot of people. And I get that. And look, especially if you're not in the US, I said this so many times, but most Americans, like a lot of things, just don't fucking get it. You don't have a choice. You have to use WhatsApp if you want to do fucking anything. If you want a little car ride down the street, you have to use WhatsApp. If you want your burrito to get in a limo and get to your place, okay, you have to use WhatsApp. You don't have a choice. Get that through your fucking heads. Okay. There. That's basically it, is that you might want to get really comfortable. I don't know what you want to exactly do with your smartwatch, but you may want to get cozy, with WhatsApp. And again, it has its own little advantages just in that it's available in so many places. Would I rather use Signal everywhere? Of course. But it has its own little advantages. Like even on, I was talking earlier, like the Quest 3 has WhatsApp built into it. And that's brilliant. You can get messages in the middle of watching, Wing Commander on a fucking 120-inch screen, that's pasted to your face. It's pretty wild. So anyway, yeah. So, but again, you'll never hear about this. There's not a single review on the fucking planet that'll talk about that. And I don't know why, because these people claim to do like deep dives on all this shit, but that's the thing. Most of these people, I'm not going to say I'm a normal person by any stretch of the imagination. Holy shit, I'm insane. No, I'm fucking crazy. Okay. All right. Got that? But these people aren't normal people. Like these influencers and whatever else. They're given scripts on what they can and can't say. Not that they're being told not to talk about this Google Messages thing, but also, to them, like, that's not relevant. Like, they're not going to talk about, what do you mean you want to use it without the phone? Like, it's not going to, other than you can, like that option exists, they're not going to talk about any efficacious way of actually doing that. Okay. You get some people that have written about that for Apple Watches, but that's a different story. So anyway, so there's what you have to consider. Okay. I think if you want LTE, I think the Pixel Watch 3, and I do recommend the 45 millimeter just for the extra battery life, because you'll get a good couple days out of it. I mean, the battery life is impressive in its own right for what it does. Just don't try playing audio from it. You'll literally lose a percentage of battery per minute if you listen to audio. And it's probably 3 times as worse with the 5.1 update for Wear OS, where now you can actually listen to it through the watch's own speaker. It's probably going to be even worse than that. But even if you're using Bluetooth headphones, like you're literally going to lose a percentage a minute. And, again, you'll go through 100% in less than 2 hours. So don't do that. I wish it would, that like, man, I really, really wish it would. I mean, like I'm to the point where I want like an independent MP3 player again, because I don't want the fucking smartphone, with me all the time, but also I can't trust, say like on a long hike, I can't trust my smartwatch, which I still want to wear to, again, be able to receive messages, get phone calls if there's an emergency, things like this. And you can still get phone calls, by the way. Like I said, the thing about, your smartphone being off, that only affects messages. You still get calls. Though it's weird. Though, again, if you just leave your smartphone on wherever it is plugged in, I don't know, even if you're, 1,000 miles away from it, you're still going to get those notifications on your Pixel Watch. So, again, just keep that in mind. But I mean, I'm to the point where like I want an MP3 player because, again, doing audio on my watch, just the battery life just doesn't allow for that. It's a real limitation. Anyway, so that's my recommendation. OnePlus, Garmin, if you really want like that feature set, if you're big on the GPS thing or something. Again, none of those have LTE, and if you do need LTE, the Pixel Watch 3 is like really your only option. Just pay attention to those quirky aspects. Okay, so you did have another tech question. Then I promised I would get into this more historical one, and I really do want to do that. Let's see. I left Apple behind after realizing just how far behind they are in AI. Do you think Gemini is going to take them? Yeah. You're not the only one that's realized this recently. Look, so, I've spoken positively after WWDC 2024 that Apple had, where they showed off Apple Intelligence. Okay. I was like, okay, what they plan on implementing, good ideas like that. This is actually useful stuff for people who, have access to LLMs and SLMs and, AI in general, all this. The problem is almost none of that has been released. And what has been released has been a joke. So as much as their plan, their marketing team was on point, their technical team is another matter. Their engineering team is another matter. And I'll say respectfully, I get it. This shit's probably really hard. And though, ironically, at the same time, like this common belief that somehow AI is changing everything, like, and AI is going to replace coders and all this stuff. Well, if AI was that fucking good, do you think it could have solved Apple's problems with Apple Intelligence? I guess not. Ridiculous. People that still think AGI is going to be a thing. Fucking A. I'm not knocking it. I like LLMs. I like SLMs. I especially like local models. Big fan. Big fan of those. Okay. Yeah. Please don't use up the entire electrical grid of the planet. Okay. But if you want to, run DeepSeek, okay, on my own, which I do, like if you want to run DeepSeek, some other version on Olama and whatever, like by all fucking means, Ed, that is awesome. Want to rock Chat RTX? Yes. Hell yes. Great. Like I love this stuff. Okay. But that doesn't mean that that I'm like, oh yeah, AGI baby. Woo. And like my nipples are ridiculously hard. Have you seen my wife's? Oh, anyway. Excuse me. Miri.xxxtech.net, folks. So, you got to get an ad in somewhere. Anyway. So, yeah, like Apple's in such a bad place as far as this stuff goes. And, even you bought it, to the listener, you bought a foldable, and bravo. That's great. You bought a foldable, and that, like, again, Apple's not there yet. Android's been there for years, and the foldable form factors have not matured yet. So there's still a lot of fun experimentation going on in that space, and honestly, I still really like, in some sense, like the long ways fold, right? Where it's a big, huge screen that you fold out. I get the practicality of that, and I could see where that could even be useful for me. I mean, I'm somebody who at times, I literally have a fold out Bluetooth keyboard that, I'll be at a coffee shop and I'll start, writing stuff and doing whatever else, on my Pixel 9. So, having larger screen real estate would actually be kind of useful for me. I still think the really practical thing though, is the clamshell, or the, where it looks like a cell phone from, 15 years ago, right? Or more, almost 20 years ago now, just kind of that flip phone style. Okay. That's I like that style. And I think Apple would be smart to go for that one, because that's the one that more people will think is quote unquote cool. So in one sense, I think they're both kind of practical, but different niches. But I mean, as far as like the one that I like, I like that more, again, the more flip phone style, much more. Anyway, but like, still cool stuff is being done in that space. And Apple's not there. So yeah, Apple feels incredibly behind right now. Not as far as laptops go. I mean, the shit they're doing with like, the M4s and all that, like, I mean, that stuff's game changing shit. Right. And obviously the PC space is seeming to go in that direction. Or the PC space is finally fracturing to where like there are these kinds of options, there's something besides x86. Right. And I applaud Apple for that big time. So, like, again, this isn't like a complete write-off on Apple by no means, and I still, many, many days of the week, I still miss my AirPods. And there isn't something really that comparable that works that seamlessly on Android. Maybe the Pixel Pros, but, like I don't jam stuff in my ear like that. They've got to be sitting like on the ear, just outside of it a bit, maybe. But yeah. Anyway, so not a whole cloth rip on Apple here on my part, even though I love your comment about iOS crack. Let's see. So yeah, do I think Gemini is going to overtake them? I mean, the thing is, Google doesn't solely rely on AI as a business model. Not really, right? So they have an ass ton of features available for free to, free tier users that very few others, if any, do. Maybe Microsoft is at that level. But I mean, this is okay. Let me make this comment. Whatever you think, let's say you just woke up. Okay. It's March 25th. You just woke up, whatever time, 7 a.m., 8 a.m. I don't know. And you just read news about AI. Okay. You went to your favorite site that maybe talks about that stuff and you're like, oh, okay. And then you're going to bed at 9 p.m., 10 p.m., whatever. Whatever you read at 8 a.m. could be completely untrue by 10 p.m. or sooner when it comes to AI. That's how fast the space is changing all the time. Okay. So me making any kind of broad proclamations, is not something like I'm 100% comfortable with right now, even though I stand by 99% of anything I've ever said about AI, because I do speak in broader long-term strokes, like what the future looks like. And in the end, like future, like, are we reaching AGI? No. AGI is pure marketing and red herring. Like that's all that is. Okay. To keep people from looking at what they really want done. With artificial intelligence. I mean, if you want to, if you want a preview of this, I mean, like on my Blue Sky account, I've started just like sharing, interesting things that I watch. And there's like a great talk by Amy Webb that she gave at South by Southwest this year. And, she's a futurist, very, very good at what she does. And I'm not saying I agree with her all the time, but I'm just saying she's good at what she does. And then you're going to get some insights into, oh, this is what really these companies are interested in and what they're all about and blah, blah, blah. She's not the only one to say this stuff, and I come to these conclusions independently. I'm just saying that if you needed another source, there's one. So anyway, I also think she is bearish. Would it be bearish, not bullish, right? The opposite of bullish. She's bearish on the idea of AGI, though I could be misspeaking on that. So is Gemini going to take them? I mean, Gemini is... So here's the thing. You're in the Android space now, right? So, like, what's interesting is Perplexity can actually, on Android specifically, can completely replace Google Assistant and Gemini. I mean, Google Assistant's already getting phased out by Gemini, but Perplexity can replace the whole thing. That's one of the advantages, of Android. Okay. There's so many things that iOS does so much better. Really, it does. But your ability to choose like these kinds of options, it's just not there yet. And like Siri's just not, it's not going to be there for years if you believe Mark Gurman. It's so bad. So, yeah, I mean, that's really cool that you could completely replace your assistant. You could completely replace Gemini on an Android phone with Perplexity. That's dynamite. You could do the same thing, I think, with ChatGPT. So, I'm not going to say that Gemini is the thing, even though I like Gemini a lot. I mean, I really do. Like, especially its deep research or its reasoning models. Like, it's really cool to be able to see how it understands you when you use a reasoning model and it shows you all of that, on an LLM. I mean, boy, if you want to learn how to do great prompt engineering, look at reasoning models in whatever service you're using. I don't care. It doesn't have to be Gemini. Okay. Look at the reasoning models if they have them and see, okay, how did it come to that conclusion? And then you can adjust accordingly to get the results that you actually want. It's a really great, I mean, it takes time, but doing great prompt engineering, which I've had to learn, over the years, and it's amazing to say that it's been years. It does take time. So, to be efficient at it anyway. So all of that said, I don't know that Gemini is going to overtake, but I do think that this is really Android's time to shine. It really, really is. Microsoft could be such a big winner in this if they would just fucking like unleash Copilot. I mean, they already have models that are besting what ChatGPT has, or at least comparable. But it's too restrictive. It's way too restrictive. Like you ask it something like about, a girlfriend or boyfriend, as in, like, oh, how should I talk to you? Like it just won't do it because it thinks you're like a predator or something. Or I don't know what the fuck it thinks. I mean, not that I've done that, obviously, but I know of people that have. But I mean, you ask it anything like remotely erotic or even quasi-sexual, even if it's like medical, like it just won't do it. It's like, oh, sorry, can't answer that, And so it's just way, way too censored, way too restrictive. And it's a shame because it's Microsoft's to lose in that sense. But I mean, on the flip side of that coin, I actually kind of, this is so tough. Here's the thing. I've talked to AI companies, okay, in Silicon Valley, like more specific AI companies. I won't name names. And really, I've talked to Silicon Valley companies. And you know what, by and large, these Silicon Valley companies, especially when you get higher up the rung, like with closer to the C-suite or even in the C-suite, these people are insane. I mean, I know I said I'm insane. No, these people are on a whole other fucking level. Good luck. And hey, I take mushrooms I I have no problem with entheogens at all. I think that's abundantly clear now, hopefully for people. Okay. Big fan here. Okay. But these people are like taking them all the time. And you can't even get a moment to talk to them when they're not on them. I don't necessarily, I want to say no judgies, okay? But my point in bringing this up is that with most AI companies and Silicon Valley companies in general, I very much feel like you're dealing with children. These are not grown-ups. These are not adults. These are not professionals. I don't know what the fuck they are. They're off their goddamn rockers, and it's not because of psilocybin. Okay? Because even when they're off of it, they're like college boys. It's so bad. Microsoft, and maybe someone has had an experience otherwise, and I'm happy to hear about it. Okay, and you can tell me about it, and I'll correct myself. But Microsoft, in every experience I've had with them, even if, say, the person I'm talking to might be slightly dense about something, they're professionals. Though there are adults in the room when you are talking to Microsoft. So, in one sense, like, yeah, guys, please lift the censorship, lift the restrictions on Copilot, please. Like, let us get, a little nuts. But at the same time, like, I'm also glad that they're such fucking professionals, because I don't know where the professionals are in this space. I haven't found them. They're clearly not at Apple. I don't know. I don't want to say anything too harsh about the C-suite at Apple. Like, the music they listen to alone, it's great. But I mean, this week I could get into a much larger subject that I think a lot of these, and this is also true for Microsoft even, but I think a lot of these people, like, they don't actually use the products that they build out. They say they do. They wear them in like their promotional videos and whatever, but no, they don't use this shit, because otherwise they'd see the very simple things, the quirks, like we've been talking about in this episode. They would see these, but they never do. Like, there is no quality control, not because there isn't a QC team, but because the companies, the leadership doesn't eat their own dog food. I mean, you can look into this, even at Google. Okay. If you think I'm praising Google, I'm not. Even at Google, the heads of the Pixel and Android divisions, I mean, maybe some of the engineers use Pixels, right? But they're daily drivers for like the C-suite or for like the management teams at Google, they're using iPhones. And it's like, oh, gee, why? We never experience our Pixels overheating. No shit, dumbass, because you don't use them. You don't eat your own dog food, as we say in programming. So they're all fucked. But I guess just at least Microsoft has some adults in the room somewhere. Might not have been Steve Ballmer, but no, that's not true. I've actually heard tremendous stories about Steve Ballmer. But anyway, okay, we don't need to. Does anybody need to simp for billionaires around here? No, not me. Fuck that shit. So, okay. We're at an hour, and I've only gotten into all this stuff. So my end point, okay, with your second question, simply is that I don't know that Gemini is going to overtake them, but it is the time for some platform to potentially take over iOS. Or if it doesn't take over, if it doesn't like supersede iOS, it may finally force iOS to open up, because people will eventually want these features. So we'll see, if NVIDIA's predictions about their robots are true. And yes, folks, the robots are coming. Is that good or bad? You tell me. All right, let's dive into some history now, shall we? Enough of the tech, even though we might bring up some very ancient tech in this conversation. Okay, so for a little context on this one. This was many months ago, maybe even like a year ago. Might have even been a couple years ago, year and a half, something like that. It doesn't matter. Okay. It's just that it's been a little while. I had in my Q&As, okay, that were on Patreon, again, if you go to patreon.com/sovryn, you can get access to all of these. I had discussed, and look, I discuss these things because I get asked about them, right? Like, that's a really key thing to understand. Just like right now, I did get asked about this, okay? In what we're going to talk about. But I had discussed that. So, all right, I guess a given that you have to take here is that some kind of ancient civilization, or what some would call Civilization X, as in an ancient advanced, of course, what level of advancement, that's a lot of there's a lot of debate to have there, but that there was an ancient civilization that is the foundation for the myths of, say, or quote unquote myths, because maybe they weren't myths, of, say, Atlantis, High Brazil, Lemuria, Mu, all these different ideas. Okay. So with the assumption, and I get it, for a lot of people, it's a big assumption, even though I don't really think it's that big of one, that there was an Atlantis, okay, that there were Atlanteans, all right, and this was the claim, that the Jews, okay, and I am speaking, if you're new to this, right, new listener on YouTube or Spotify or wherever, and you just found all this, of course, I am Jewish, I'm an Ashkenazi Jew, okay, so I'm speaking from, well, I have a doctorate of divinity, I don't know, there's a few other things behind me here in the studio that list off some credentials. Anyway, so the Jews are descendants of the Atlanteans. Now, the first time that I ever really encountered this idea, okay, was actually in something that, of course, people want to laugh about, whatever, and that's fine. But actually came out of, it was the Book of Urantia that kind of pointed in this direction. Okay. There are other books out there, some of which I think are really, really fascinating, like the work of Brinsley Trench and others that also point at this, that you can find, like, basically I think Trench's point was you can find Atlantean blood in, like, Native Americans and Jews, among some other groups. Okay. Where it, it stayed. Now the Urantia thing, I mean, that's a whole other fucking animal that I'm not going to get into right here. Okay. But it's an interesting one to be sure for varying reasons, even if it did turn up to all be nonsense and BS. Okay. So I talked about this very briefly. Okay. But whatever, I touched on it, and I even said, it's like, yeah, like there really needs to be a lot of research done in this area. It'd be like, I would love to do it if people wanted to fund it or something like that. But let's get to the question, but there's your context. And this is the question that the person asked. Well, the email they sent in, actually, this might've been a Patreon message. Anyway, it might come off kind of hostile, but I'm thinking maybe they're being a little sarcastic, little joculant. Here we go. Whoa, Rabbi SOVRYN, hold on a minute. On your podcast, you actually said the Jews are descendants of Atlanteans? Seriously? Where in the world did you even get that idea? Well, I just kind of told you where it started, or where it germinated from a bit, but anyway, I'll keep reading the question. Quote, I mean, isn't there like a mountain of historical and archaeological evidence pointing to their origins in the Middle East, not some mythical sunken island? Just curious what kind of quote unquote research led you to that conclusion. Okay. So very interesting. And I mean that. Very interesting that you happen to use the word mountain. In fact, you said mountain of evidence, because that's actually where perhaps some of this evidence comes from, a mountain. Now, one of the sources that I didn't mention that would have given me this idea, and actually would be the most direct of the bunch, other direct than, like, Trench just coming right out and saying, like, no, yeah, Jews are Atlanteans. Right. And he's not exactly like positive on Atlanteans either. You know, he doesn't exactly hold them in a positive light, which is another interesting thing to certainly to talk about, and might point at, say, some of the works of guys like Franz Joseph, even though, hey, look, just because I'm quoting these people doesn't mean I agree with even, 5% of the shit that these people say. Okay. I'm just pointing at like, hey, I am not just coming up with this stuff out of nowhere. Okay. There are others who have talked about this long before I even was alive. But it's out there. Anyway, speaking of long before I was alive, perhaps the most direct evidence actually comes from a Roman historian named Tacitus. Now, some people put historian in quotes when it comes to Tacitus. Some archaeologists and historians may want to actually, or, modern historians may want to actually claim he should more accurately be called a propaganda man. And there's debates to be had there any way you want to look at it. But Tacitus's works have certainly been heavily, scoured and read over. And one of Tacitus's claims, and this was partly to bolster the sacking of the Second Temple in the 1st century CE, by Titus. And by Second Temple, we mean the Jewish Second Temple. Okay, Herod's temple, right? Tacitus writes about the Jews in this. Now, he also is not being complimentary. He's basically saying these Jews, they're the scum of the earth. I mean, boy, that narrative hasn't changed for shit, has it? Jeez. Whatever, I'll run with it, Because compared to the Romans, the Jews are terrible. Oh, man. Ooh. Compared to the fucking Romans. All right. Pot kettle black. Anyway, okay. So Tacitus makes these wild claims, and he's also not the only historian of the time to do so, but he's certainly the most prominent. But Tacitus makes these wild claims that the Jews were actually, they're not like actually from, Israel. They're not from, or Roman Palestine. They're not from Judea. Okay. They're actually expelled Egyptians, and or they're Cretans. Not Cretans in the pejorative, but Cretans in that they're from Crete. And you know how much the Romans fucking hate Crete, right? Where's Hannibal? Anyway, so right, isn't that where after the Second Punic War they say Hannibal ran off to Crete? Anyway, so so the claim is that the Jews overall, basically, they actually came from the island of Crete. Particularly, they were a people from Mount Ida, in that the idea Judea is actually a play on the word Idaean, as in from Mount Ida. Now, Mount Ida, there's a lot that we could really, believe me, I would love to do some kind of actual documentary style video on this. Okay. Because I'm pulling pieces from varying sources. Okay. Who, do not come to the same conclusions and whatever, but they have some very interesting evidence that they're all sort of playing off of. Okay. But I've never really heard anybody claim this. I'm going to make a couple of really insane claims here. You think the Jews are Atlanteans thing is wild? Oh, just wait. I'm going to up that. All right. And again, I'm just doing a Q&A here. Okay. So all of the evidence, no, again, it would need to be a documentary, at least, if not a mini series, right? Okay. But we'll run with it. I will put my neck on the chopping block. Good thing I work out and my neck is huge. It's not the only thing huge on me, but whatever, time to measure. Here we go. Okay. So Mount Ida, also happens to be where, supposedly like Zeus came from. That gets into some very interesting territory in the idea that perhaps, well, we're going to talk about Tom DeLonge in a second, and I'll try to remember to circle back on that point. But that's ultimately the claim. Now, what is Crete most famous for on an anthropological historical level? Most famously, it's known for being the site of the, mysterious or somewhat mysterious culture. And that's an accurate term to use because can we translate linear B? No. But that being the Minoans. Okay. Now I've talked about and written about the Minoans many, many times over the past, now 13 years. Okay. And I've always said that if you want to find like the source of a lot of history's mysteries, you start right there. They're snake goddesses, all of it, the whole thing. Okay. So let's say that Tacitus is right. Now, a lot of, modern scholars would say that, no, Tacitus was writing a hit piece on the Jews to justify, like I said earlier, the destruction of the Second Temple by Titus. And, whether or not that's true, I mean, there could certainly be some flourish, but at the same time, I don't think, look, at the time when you wrote this stuff, okay, you could put in some flourish, but overall, unless it was like an edict by, say, the emperor to make the emperor seem really good, which I mean, Titus would, end up rising, to the heights. But my point is, you needed some fact in your fiction. Okay. So, Tacitus couldn't just make stuff up whole cloth. Like that wouldn't work. And we could spend a ton of time getting into that. I mean, it's kind of the same logic as to why, when you get these weird reports of, from like woodcuts, which were newspapers of the time in the area that would later be known as Germany, or some other parts of Europe, from like the 15th, 16th century, something like that, where they're talking about like these cigar shaped ships in the sky, and like there was like a battle going on or something. You can't write bullshit at that time because the consequences of making such wild claims at the time in Europe, talk about getting put on the chopping block. I mean, you'd get excommunicated at best. And that was out of the Catholic Church, that is. Like, I mean, basically the Pope would review all of these claims. And man, if you made something insane, like you were branded a heretic. Okay. Now in Rome, you had somewhat of a similar situation. Okay. And that's my point, is that, yeah, you can make some stuff up, but you can't exactly make up everything. There has to be some evidence for what you're talking about. So, I mean, I could get into a whole conspiracy around, like, I think historians today, modern historians, I think a lot of them, they love to use this claim that, oh, the Romans are making this shit up on a lot of things, or even for the Greeks. Because if they don't, then there's some things in Roman writings or writings from Roman times that, you've got to answer for, and they're strange things, like things that would be in city museums at the time in ancient Rome and others that defy explanation. And certainly a lot of the, the archaeological history that we accept today. So again, won't spend a ton of time on that, but this is my point. I don't want to get conspiratorial on the matter, but sometimes you can't help but do that, just so, modern historians like don't have to run into these things that completely fuck with their narrative. I mean, and if you don't believe me that they do this to the Romans, just look up when they found, Pompeii, like in Pompeii, after they're able to, do some digging, or after, from the aftermath of Mount Vesuvius in modern times, we're talking like early 20th century, they literally would put plaster over the frescoes in Pompeii because they didn't want people to know of the sexual acts that were being done in Pompeii, which the whole city was basically based around pleasure. But they didn't want people to see that. They didn't want them to know. They didn't want like this narrative that, Rome was this or that, to like it was debased or something along those, whatever. Like they didn't want that narrative to fly. I mean, and this is historical fact that modern archaeologists, modern historians, would do this narrative, or the shit that they'd hide in Italian museums that they wouldn't let people see. Like, a guy doing weird things to a goat, I mean, look it up. I'm warning you, but look it up. Okay. So this is my point, is that do historians lie to preserve their narratives? 1,000%. We have unmitigated proof of that. So, okay. So I think Tacitus, at least to a large degree, was being honest and accurate in what he was reporting. Now, I mean, does this fact alone that the Jews actually come from Greece or maybe via Egypt, okay, which fits very well within Ahmed Osman's phenomenal work. Does it fit into, that, like, is that wild in itself? 100%. Yes, of course it is. Like that's an amazing statement to make in the first place. Okay. But and it's not just Tacitus that we're going to look at here to prove that point or to, bring evidence to light about this possibility. How about that? Is that a little more comfortable for you? You feel better about the way I phrased that? Okay. So Tacitus claims that no, the Jews came from, they came from Crete. Now, again, if you come from Crete, there's a very good chance that you're a descendant of the Minoans. Now, the Minoans are often, by a lot of researchers around Atlantis, or even people who just, look into like all of the cities and potential other empires that could have existed in the Mediterranean, because again, there's hundreds of cities that are underwater that we've never explored in the Mediterranean alone. And I'm not kidding about that hundreds number. Okay. We know they're there. We just haven't done a lot of looking at them. Why? Great question, but we'll move on. So, I mean, it's expensive, sure, but that doesn't stop other excavations from going on, or expeditions. But anyway, so, a lot of researchers, quote unquote, into Atlantis would make the claim that the Minoans themselves are actually like the descendants of the Atlanteans. Like they're the expats of Atlantis after whatever the hell happened to Atlantis. And it regardless of the veracity of that, like the Minoans are a mysterious culture for many reasons. They don't have a similar culture to any other culture around them. And I mean, as in they don't, as far as we can tell, they didn't engage in war. They engaged almost whole cloth in trade. They had these very, like the women had the very unique dresses that exposed the breasts all the time. They don't really have any temples. Like it doesn't look like they actually have a religion. Like they have these snake goddess figures that are like in every house, but it doesn't look like they actually have a religion. And of course, I've written about that snake goddess and kind of the identity around that. I'm not going to get into that here. But this is the point, is that it is an odd man out culture all the way. And again, you have, like linear B, like the Phaistos disc, where we don't even know what it says. Like we can't translate it. And, that opens up for a lot of interpretation around, the culture around what generated that. But it doesn't, again, that can all be kind of speculation until we can actually translate it. But this is the point, is that there's a lot of mystery around this culture. It is an oddity in history, an absolute oddity, like the Basque people or something along those lines. So, okay. So this is, part of the point is you have, we have some evidence that yes, the Judeans, the Jews, were actually from a completely different area than people thought, have a completely different history than, the mainstream narrative says. And it's a narrative that puts them in, shall we say, spitting distance of being descendants of Atlanteans, if you buy into that, into that train of thought. So what else can we point at, though? Well, here's where I'm going to make an even weirder statement. There is, and to be fair, I guess we would classify it somewhat under supposition, like it would be called supposition or extrapolation. There's the work of, I think this guy's work is really, really fascinating. Okay. Dr. D.C. Iman Hillman. He's written about 3 books. One of those books. Now, this guy is a genuine classicist. I mean, he has all of the credentials and skills required. Okay, he is somebody who translates Greek. And that's where the term like classicist would come from. So Dr. Hillman, alongside, and this is probably when people are going to like toss out whatever he has to say, but I love it. Alongside making the claim that Jesus, and this is based upon his translation of the Koine Greek of the New Testament that the Gospels are written in, and well, all of it's written in. The claim that Jesus was actually like a pedophile and, ran like a child slave ring and all this other stuff, which he's probably right. I mean, Jesus was a Roman agent anyway, a Roman spy. So, I find that fascinating, but he kind of offhand makes this bigger claim, this more earth-shattering claim, that I think is fascinating. And again, based upon, a bit of logic, actually makes sense that the Torah, I'm going to get excommunicated right here. Okay. Live on YouTube, baby. I'm going to get excommunicated. That Torah was not originally written in Hebrew. That Torah was like that the Tanakh, like the Hebrew Torah, that was not the original version of, quote unquote, for you Christians, the Old Testament. That actually the Septuagint, which is, all right, so history on the Septuagint, if you don't know. I've talked about it a bunch of times, but if you don't know. The Septuagint is supposedly the Greek translation of Torah, okay? Done in like 3rd century BC. And, there's like a big miracle around how it got put together and blah, blah, blah. Okay, but the basic concept is that the Septuagint was a translation of the Hebrew Aramaic original. Hillman's point is actually no, it's the opposite. The Septuagint was the original, and the Tanakh, the Hebrew, is actually the translation. Wild idea, but he has a point. And I've even talked about this in other areas, like where you look at, like there's odd things that when you read communications between, say, the temple at Elephantine and the second temple, or on Elephantine Isle, which is in Egypt, by the way. Like the idea that like there's certain concepts that people considered like a standard today within rabbinicism that the Jews in Egypt seem to have no fucking idea about. The Jews at Elephantine Isle, which they had a complete mimic of the temple, okay, they had no idea about these things. And so the concept would be that, well, there wasn't actually like a shared text that they all had. Now, you have other genuine, respected scholars, people with all the pedigree, who have also made the claim that, say, the Torah was actually invented by, quote unquote Jews. We're talking like 1st century something, or 1st or 2nd century BCE, but basically it was invented when they were freed, say, from, well, no, so that'd be before 2nd BC. Anyway, sorry. This is so much information. This is why I want to do like a documentary on this. Okay. But that it was actually produced to give them claim to the area known as Judea, that it didn't exist before. And that's without getting into, the story around Hillel the Elder, where like the holy books, the Jews seem to have, and this is in the books of Kings, the Jews seem to have lost the Torah. They didn't have it, and somehow they found Deuteronomy. I've talked about this so many times, I don't want to get into all of it again. Okay, the bottom line is that I'm getting to you is that there is extensive evidence to suggest that the Tanakh, or Old Testament, okay, that you know it as today, its composition is not so black and white as, Christians in particular and certain rabbinic groups and other groups, other Jewish groups would have you believe. I mean, there's even like different narratives in the same books, like, and it's so obvious. I mean, you have the priestly narrative in Torah, and then you have like what you could call, I guess, the Deuteronomists or the legal eagles, you know, who are all about these laws and everything. I mean, you have these conflictive narratives within the same books themselves, and you can tell, you know. So anyway, so Hillman's claim that the Septuagint was actually the original is, again, I mean, that's astounding. That's absolutely fascinating. Now, what makes this even stronger, okay, what gets really, really interesting here, I think I mentioned Tom DeLonge earlier, okay? Let's bring in Tom DeLonge. Not a fan of the music, man. I do not like it. A lot of people in, shall we say, more conspiracy circles, high strangeness circles, think that Tom DeLonge is, you know, kind of a smart mark for the government. You know, he's not actually one of the good guys. Okay. You know, maybe, whatever. Again, I no love lost on my part. All right. But he made an interesting claim over a decade ago that the wreckage, here we go. Here come the UFOs. Get ready. Woo! That the wreckage from Roswell, New Mexico, that, you know, there's some pictures and there's things that are claimed to be, you know, part of the wreckage where, from the supposed UFO or weather balloon, depending upon who you want to believe, that show like these glyphs on this, like, on this like I-beam, it looks like, and the glyphs, you know, look kind of alien, but Tom DeLonge said, actually, no, that doesn't look alien. That looks like Greek. And in fact, when you translate it, it translates to freedom in Greek. So the question becomes, let's say that that's true. The question becomes, why did supposed quote unquote aliens, if they were, you know, as in extraterrestrials, maybe they were interdimensional beings, whatever, but why did this wildly advanced craft have Greek written on it? Now, it shouldn't go unnoticed that, or unmentioned, ignored, that's the word I want to use. It shouldn't be ignored that, you know, some of the most advanced technologies that we provably have from ancient cultures happen to be Greek. Think, you know, the Antikythera mechanism, you know, among some others, or, you know, come from Greek sources. And this isn't an Indiana Jones movie, folks. Believe me, it's not that last one or the one before that either. Anyway, so, you know, this presents a very wild idea. Now, the interesting thing is, again, we're putting together a lot of pieces. I'm just doing a Q&A and I got to do it kind of fast. Okay. The interesting thing is that, you know, one of the historical, and it depends if you want to consider this to be like an actual eyewitness account or if it's bullshit. Okay. But one of the classic texts that we have of a potential extraterrestrial visitation, I'm not saying aliens or whatever. In fact, the claim would be in the book that it was, you know, fallen angels or whatever, but would be the Book of Enoch. Now, in the Book of Enoch, you have this instance where the Watchers come down. Okay. And, you know, this is where out of, you know, Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, where it's saying, you know, in the Nephilim, you know, they took human women because they thought they were fair and gave birth to, or, well, not the Nephilim, but you know, the sons of God came down and gave birth to the Nephilim. Okay. Now, where did this happen? Does the Book of Enoch actually tell us what mountain, perhaps, or what area did they land in? And yes, it does. It actually tells us the mountain, or it tells us the mountain range, that being Mount Hermon. Now, the fascinating thing with Mount Hermon, now Mount Hermon is what today would be called the Golan Heights. That's not to be ignored either, but considering how contentious it is. But regardless, that's the Golan Heights. Now, in the Golan Heights, you have many, many temples, a lot of them Roman, in fact, but you have many, many temples. But even those Roman temples, you can see, were built on top of at least 2 or 3 other strata of temples, including Greek. At the highest point in Mount Hermon is an area and a temple known as Kasarantar. And there probably is a good chance I didn't pronounce that right, but whatever. But there's actually an inscription that directly references, and has been ever since it was discovered, okay, by Sir Charles Warren back in the 19th century. Ever since that was discovered, like it's been attributed to talking about the events of the Watchers coming down from the Book of Enoch. In fact, the inscription on a stela there at Qasar and Tar says, quote, "According to the command of the greatest and holy God, those who take an oath proceed from here," end quote. And so their claim is that's talking about the oath that the fallen angels take in the Book of Enoch, that, okay, we're going to take human women and have babies with them and blah, 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 and we're going to do the business. Now, can you guess what language that inscription is written in? Greek. So we have the interesting possibilities that a supposed UFO crash, or UAP if you feel better about that. Again, we're not going to talk about the source of the UAP. Was it interdimensional, extraterrestrial? Was it just, out of Antarctica? Who don't know? Who knows? Okay. But we have the potential that this wildly advanced technology encountered at Roswell, New Mexico, had Greek inscriptions on it. And that one of the, I would argue, the best and oldest accounts, if you want to consider it myth, go ahead, but one of the oldest accounts of an encounter with, beings from the sky. Okay. In this case, the Watchers, the quote unquote fallen angels. There's a lot more to unpack around that. I wouldn't call them fallen angels, but whatever. Happen to have the same language. And then the idea, so, I didn't touch on this. I mean, part of Dr. Hillman's point that actually, like, there's no way that the Hebrew version of the Bible came first. It had to have been from the Septuagint. It had to be from the Greek, is that you can't translate a simple language, which, let me be clear here, biblical Hebrew, not modern Hebrew, biblical Hebrew is incredibly easy to learn. It's so basic. Like, it's very few words. Okay. It's not a hunting language, but it's dang near. So, but that you can't translate into a more complex language from a simpler language. You can go the other way around where you can simplify things. And, it would make sense. He didn't say this. I'm putting this point in, from my own understanding and research. Okay. That in some ways we know, especially if you're, studied in Kabbalah, that the Torah, particularly the first 5 books of the Bible, are very much in code. It's not the Bible code, none of that horseshit. Okay. It's encoded in that all of the letters, and you can read this from rabbis, from sages, from 1,000 years ago, where they'll tell you, like the letters are in the wrong order, because if they're in the right order, you could create worlds, you could perform miracles, you could do all kinds of things. So the original Torah is actually in code. And so that, in my opinion, actually bolsters Dr. Hillman's point that no, they might have taken the stories, but they took all the Hebrew characters. I'm not saying there isn't they took all the Hebrew characters and just put them in that order and blah, blah, blah. And they made like a simplified kind of coded version. Understand me that I'm not saying that the Hebrew language is unnecessary. I'm not saying that there isn't some kind of power to the Torah, especially with using the Hebrew characters. So maybe I won't get excommunicated today. All right. No, I was probably already excommunicated years ago. Even my dad called me a Parkos once, so whatever. But anyway, there's still value in that, and there's still something very deep to that and powerful to that. Okay. I don't believe in a sky daddy God, by the way, folks, just to be clear on that as well. Again, if you're new here, and a lot of this stuff I've already covered so many times for over a decade. So I'm being very quick again, like I said, for this Q&A. But the idea that the Greek was actually the original, and that the Greek, may be like this language, this out of the blue language, just like maybe, kind of the Minoans or this out of the blue culture or whatever. And it actually comes from like this more advanced culture, is a fascinating idea. And that perhaps I mean, and look, like before anybody says it's like, oh, the Jews would, there's no way, like the Jews think that any language other than Hebrew is ugly and blah. No, that's not true. Actually, you can read from a lot of stages from 2,000 years ago where they said that Greek is the most beautiful. They actually said Greek was the most beautiful language ever written. They said that Hebrew, or others said that Hebrew is like the first language, but Greek is the second. It's the only thing. In fact, you hear this through, like, say, talking about the Septuagint, that the only language that Torah could ever get translated into accurately is Greek. This is coming from Jewish sages, folks, at the time. So, and, like, it becomes a thing. I mean, you think of like Hanukkah, right? Which Hanukkah is this, it's a very complex thing, but it's an event that actually happened. And it's something that happened between, shall we say, more traditional Jews and Hasmonean Jews, or Hellenized Jews, I should say. Hasmonean, I mean, anyway, I won't get into the complexities around that. But it was a war between basically Jews that believed in, or thought that they had like this stronger tradition, and then those that were becoming Hellenized, as in they were becoming kind of Greek. They're becoming Greek Jews. Now, what if the appeal to, Greek culture or the Greek language and all this appeal to Hellenization by so many Jews actually came down to the fact that deep down they felt, no, this is actually where we come from. I mean, this could turn the entire, Hanukkah story on its head. Like, I mean, it's wild. So this, I know I'm tossing a lot out here, but they're fascinating ideas, and I think there's some validity to it. I think Dr. Hillman's work, you should definitely take a look at that. But this is the point. I mean, the point why I'm bringing in all the Greek stuff partly is because, yes, we have the Mount Hermon situation, okay, where there is this event, this place where, the Watchers came down, and the inscription about it is in Greek. Is it because like the Christians wrote it there? Actually, it's very, believe it or not, because if you look up about the inscription, they'll tell you when they think it's dated to, but they actually say, we really have no idea. We can't really date when this inscription was put here. And understand that when you buy into the Genesis narrative, the Watchers actually teach humanity things. Did they teach them the Greek language? And that somehow, it was like a secret that was passed down until it exploded into the Greek Empire. I mean, you ask a lot of Christians, historians, and even some Jews, and they'll tell you that, the Alexander the Great seemed to have been, and actually his own commentators would say this, but that he was moved by a divine hand. And so, was there was there something there to this spreading of Greek culture? I mean, another thing you can, modern historians will say, like, who is the most influential person in history? Granted, you're going to get a very Western answer if you're in a Western country. Okay. But the claim would be, most people would say, oh, Jesus, easily. And a historian would correct you and say, no, it's actually Alexander the Great, because without the spread of the Greek language throughout large swaths of the world, Jesus' message could have never gotten out there, not in the way that it did. So there's, there's a power in this. There's something that, and I'm not making this grand claim about Western civilization. You know me better than that. I don't. All right. But there is something to this. And it becomes, when we get into the idea that, that perhaps the Septuagint was actually, was actually the original version of the Bible. And then but then who wrote that, and where did that come from? And where did Hebrew come from? Like, it completely changes the game. Now, I mean, the Hebrew language could have existed, concurrently anyway, out of, and the evidence would suggest that. We also have Proto-Hebrew and all this. I mean, I'm painfully aware of all these things. Okay. But the idea that there was this cultural spread that occurred, and that's without even, I'd love to spend a ton of time on like the power of language itself, because there's something to be said about that. There's so much to unpack here, but this is kind of the start, so to the question, right? Like what? Let's go back to the question. On your podcast, you actually said the Jews are descendants of Atlanteans. Seriously, where in the world did you even get that idea? I mean, isn't there like a mountain of historical and archaeological evidence pointing to their origins in the Middle East, not some mythical sunken island? Just curious what kind of quote unquote research led you to that conclusion. Well, here you go. This turns I mean, look, like I said, this turns the entire narrative on its head. Ahmed Osman has already done, top drawer work showing that like the stories of David and Solomon and all that are actually coded stories for Egyptian history, not Hebrew history. And I, as a Jew, Kohanim, in fact, okay, as Jewish as they fucking come, I think Ahmed Osman's research is pretty spot on. And then you bake in this factor. And look, yeah, the evidence, quote unquote, good luck. Find the evidence around the shit that happened in the Bible. It's not there. Find the evidence that there was actually contemporary, as in contemporary of its time, contextual evidence that King David existed when he existed. Not that King David got written about hundreds of years later. I mean that he existed when he existed. Find that evidence. It doesn't fucking exist. There's a reason for that, because it didn't happen that way. And bake all of this in that we talked about. The idea of the Jews coming from Crete, the idea of the Jews potentially being the Minoans or descended from the Minoans and so on, all of this. You end up with an incredibly different story. Now, do you have to go so far as Atlantis? No, not really, but you are still left with some pretty wild mysteries, including one about some intelligences landing on Mount Hermon and taking an oath, and apparently taking human women. And what's that all about? So I'm going to leave it at that. Woo! Get your questions in, baby. On the YouTube comments, on the Spotify comments, in the email, fu@xxtech.net. And that's not me being crass. It means follow up. That's all the FU stands for, is follow up. Get them in, baby. Hit me hard. As Johnny Mnemonic would say, hit me. I think this stuff is absolutely, like, the possibilities are absolutely fascinating. But the most important thing is, just like questioning authority isn't about being right or wrong, it's about questioning authority. That's its own value. Questioning the narratives that you are constantly being fed always has its own value. You may not like it. You may disagree with it. It's not about right and wrong, but just questioning narratives is always a healthy thing to do. And with that, I will see all of you on the other side.